So there has to be, even in almost every act of perception, that right hand and left hand that you talked about.
Right.
That mercy and justice has to be part.
There has to be allowance for imperfection and error. Well, also orientation towards the aim. Yeah, and getting that balance right. Well, that's part of what consciousness does, I would say, is it constantly adjudicates between those two higher order principles. Now, those aren't the only principles, but and there's no final solution to that, right? You can't just say, well, we're all compassionate and we're done with it. It's like, no. And it's an ongoing problem, right? With your kids, you're always wondering, they make a mistake. It's, well, how much do you forgive them? And how much do you say, how about you don't do that again? It's really embarrassing. It's terrible for you. If you replicate that error, your life is going to be a bloody catastrophe. You're old enough to figure it out. It's like, clue in. And you might say, well, who loves the child more? The one who says, oh, it's okay, everything you do is lovely, which it isn't. Or the person who says, you could do better. And, the answer is, well, it's a discussion between those two viewpoints constantly, because and in your relationship with yourself, it's like, how much do you forgive yourself? And the answer certainly is 0. It's not 0. That's, no one can live without being able to forgive themselves to some degree. But by the same token, you don't want to let yourself off the hook for every idiot error you make. And because that just doesn't work, because there are real errors, and
there are real consequences.
Yes, for you and other people. Right. And there's the real, which we're all wondering about now. This is one of the things that I think is quite comical, and I talked to Dawkins about this. Is the rationalists, the scientists, the atheists, and the postmodernists as well really took the idea of the divine to pieces. And even in the dismissive way that you see with someone, say, like Harris, although, like I said, he has his meditation and he dwells in the realm of the sacred. He just leaves it ineffable, right? And doesn't ritualize it, doesn't turn it into any kind of intellectual creed. And I think he does that because if he turned it into an intellectual creed, his rationality would just tear it to pieces. And so then he would have nothing, in any case, we've dispensed with the idea of the sacred transcendent, let's say, and that's the hard-headed way of thinking about the world. But what the reductive atheists didn't quite figure out was the Dostoevskian problem. It's like, well, if there's no God, everything is permitted. Well, how about we don't believe in objects anymore? Well, that won't happen. It's like, yeah, really, that won't happen, eh? What makes you think that, like, do the Buddhists believe in objects? Not really. The world's Maya, it's illusion. There's no transcendent material world. That's a Western idea. And I really think it came out of, well, partly Greece, but certainly came out of ideas that are associated with the logos on the logic side and on the religious side. It's like there's a transcendent world. It's material, but it's a transcendent world. You can't just do any old thing. You will be, the objective world will object to what you're doing. And so then it's an inexhaustible source of corrective wisdom. And it's the realization of that, in some sense, that's the precondition for science. You have to believe that before you can be a scientist. There's a reality out there that transcends your knowledge. And the postmodern types, technically, they just rejected that completely. They collapsed ontology, which is the study of being, let's say, into epistemology. It said, no, it's all words. It's like, oh, I see. So we stopped believing in God. Now we stop believing in the object. And if you're wondering why the DEI types are taking on the STEM people, if you haven't noticed that, and are going to win, by the way, it's because they don't believe in the objective world. What the hell do you need scientists for? There's no objective reality. It's just whim. People can't believe that. It's like, that's what people have believed for most of time. And what do you mean they can't believe that? You mean till the bridges start falling down? They'll just blame that on insufficient diversity. Yeah, it'd be funny if it wasn't true.
I think we're in a moment. There's this zeitgeist, there's this change that's happened. You've been part of it, definitely, where suddenly people are starting to realize this. And I think it's also going together with the extremity of the madness of the ideologues. And that's exactly it, that we are at a point where objective reality itself, where mathematics themselves are being questioned by ideologues, where 2 + 2 = 5, where people are arguing for these types of things. And how do we come back to that without, let's say, bringing about this notion of this incarnational principle, we could say, right? That even things that we encounter in the world, they are embodiments of embedded in higher truth. We could say that they kind of scale up, and that there's a flexibility to it, right? It's not hard, but that flexibility is part of how we engage with it.
Yeah. Well, as far as I can tell, and I mean, I think this is happening to some degree in the culture, is that, I mean, Carl Jung believed, and he was the wisest psychologist I've ever read by a large margin. He certainly believed that we had to delve. So Jung was a student of Nietzsche. I don't mean he, formally, but he was very well versed in Nietzschean thinking, as much or more so than in Freudian thinking. And he really devoted his life to addressing a proposition that Nietzsche put forward. And Nietzsche said, well, God is dead and we have killed him and we'll never find the water to wash away the blood. The holiest that we have created has now died at our own hands. And he thought that was an absolute catastrophe, because Nietzsche was a very smart man and a very wise man. But he made a real error, I believe, and he posited that because of this collapse of values, this precipitous collapse of the value that unifies all values, or that is the precondition for all values, that we would be lost. He certainly felt that we would fall into nihilism, or that we would fall prey to communist idolatry in particular, which he predicted dead on, just like Dostoevsky did. But then he also said the solution to that will be that the Superman will have to appear, the Übermensch, and he will be the man who can create his own values. And so both Freud and Jung were interested in that idea. Freud more peripherally, but Jung more consciously. And part of what Jung was trying to find out is, well, could we create our own values? And the answer he came up with was, no, that's not possible. And why? So the question is why? Well, for the psychoanalysts, we were beset by fantasies, and these are sort of autonomous personalities that dwell in our subconscious, let's say, in our imagination, in our dreams, and that possess us from time to time. The spirit of rage, the spirit of lust, the spirit of envy, these ancient gods that possess us, and these values and temptations and impulses that come upon us that we cannot control. They're part of our autonomous nature. And because they have this autonomy, and so that would be the autonomy of emotions and the autonomy of motivations, and then even the autonomy of the spirit that unites motivations, because we don't know, for example, in the spirit of play, for example, play is an instinct. Play integrates base motivations into a higher unit.